Daniel chapter 7. And this is interesting. I may have made a mistake. I was trying to reflect on things I said last week. And I may have made an error, which is probably more common than one would believe. But the prophecy that we're going to look at is in Daniel chapter 7 is tied to Daniel chapter 8. And so those two prophecies get tied together. They're kind of exclusive, specific units, but there's going to be connection because they're going to be during the same time period. And so that's interesting. In that, in the middle of that, we switch from Aramaic to Hebrew. So we've got two prophecies that are tied together, but yet there's disconnection in that they change languages. So I don't really have a good answer. If you were to ask me the question, well, what does that mean? I can't really give you a good answer for what that is. We'll maybe look a little bit more at that next week about what the characteristics are that prompt the change from one language to the next. Okay, so the prophecy we're going to look at tonight is probably the second most popular piece of Daniel. The first most being Daniel and the lion's den that we looked at last week. Everybody knows the story of Daniel and the lion's den. Even if they don't know it in all of its detail, they at least know that story. The next thing then that we have is in chapter 7, where we have these four creatures that show up in Daniel's vision. Right? She always gets inquisitive about some of the things that are out there. She says, if you Google Daniel chapter 7, there are more images of what these creatures look like than you could believe. And she's right. If you Google the creatures from Daniel chapter 7, there are so many pictures, artist renditions of what these creatures would look like. And that is because they're quite interesting when we start reading this passage about what in the world is it that we are looking at. So it's the kind of thing for an artist, picturing that, and then if you've got that artistic ability to take something you've pictured in your mind and translate that into an image, just imagine it, I can picture it. It's the going from here to anything that would. So, and I'm guessing, John, from your experience with Will's artistic work, this is a correct analysis of his artistic ability. He might have some good ideas, but when he puts it down on paper, not so good. So, it's it really is a blessing to have that kind of talent, and it was not one that I was given or blessed with. So we're just gonna leave it at that. So now this is our first prophecy from Daniel. We've had some prophecy that came by way of dreams through the kings, right? But this is a vision that has come to Daniel. So we read, as we start out in Daniel chapter 7, it says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and vision in his mind as he lay on his own bed. Okay, so we've had, up to this point, as we've been reading the story, we've had some visions from the kings, and so their dreams, and Daniel has interpreted those for them and let them know what was going to happen. That has revealed the future. So this is an interesting piece of what we have in Daniel's story. That the visions, many of the visions that we deal with, were given to pagan Gentile kings. That never struck you as unusual? Why would God give these pagan kings these visions?
I think it's something he used for life and to get that influence into the people.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that's a wonderful thought. That is a wonderful thought. So what she was saying is that God gives the vision to Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar or whoever it might be, so that God can then use Daniel to come in to be the interpreter of the dream, and he has that influence because he has the connection and so forth. So I think probably she stated it as well as anybody there. Any other thoughts? Why would God give these pagan kings visions?
Well, and the other part of that is because he knew that they would go to their sorcerers and magicians first.
Okay, so we kind of get the battle royale, so to speak, where we've got, magicians and sorcerers and Chaldeans that get called in all the time, right? And they can't do it, and Daniel comes in and can do it, so there's kind of the conflict there, and God's showing that he is supreme over those things. Well, you've got something, I don't know if you know, a side.
So if Daniel was to get a dream, went to the king and told about these prophecies, would the king believe him?
Okay, so then, I think is the opposite side of the coin too, is that if Daniel received a vision and then just took that to the king, that's not quite as impactful as it is if the king himself receives a vision. Remember that, with Nebuchadnezzar, he received that first vision and it was very disturbing to him. He was distraught. He was upset by it. So yeah, by giving him the vision, Daniel can give him the interpretation, but the emotion came from King Nebuchadnezzar. Right? Any other thought? One last one that I would throw out there. You guys all came up with some of the thoughts I had about it and some thoughts I hadn't had about it. So that's great. One of the pieces I might throw out there also is that remember, God puts kings in places. It's his doing. And God wants for these people to come to recognize who he is. Right? We're all God's children, even these pagan kings. And so I genuinely think that God has an interest in trying to help bring about the conversion of these kings. So I think that's, especially with Nebuchadnezzar's story, I truly think that that's what God was doing there. He was trying to get him to open his mind to who God is. And you get that final little piece of that story when Nebuchadnezzar looks to the heavens and finally he recognizes, you know what? I haven't acknowledged that there is one true God. And then he gets his mind back, right? So I think some of it is all of that. So Daniel received prophecy, and Will's point's well taken that if Daniel just receives a prophecy and takes it to the king, probably not as impactful. So who might the audience for these visions, besides Daniel, obviously he saw it, who might the audience be?
You see, it's those people who can take him?
I certainly think that they're going to be a big piece of it, right? Let me read the second part of the first verse as we read that. So, in his mind, he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. So, he didn't write the whole thing down. He just says it's a summary. We ever run into that in the Bible? How does John, towards the end of his gospel, talk about the things of Jesus? It's just too much, right? It's just too much to write the whole of it down. So these things were written that you might believe. Now, I'm making a leap here, but I think the same thing is really is what we're talking about. Daniel writes down a summary of his dream because he wanted these people, his people, and all of those that would come after, that we would believe. Right? This is, I think, the purpose of him writing it down. He wrote it down so that we would have this record that we can then use, and that becomes part of our foundation in belief, right? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. This is God's word. Look, this is the vision given to Daniel, and he wrote it down. Okay, so he writes the summary version. This is Reader's Digest condensed version of what he actually saw. So let's read the 2 through 14. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great seas, and four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this they kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong. It had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I contemplated the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and the 3 first horns were pulled out by the roots before it, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth uttering great boasts. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming around before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him. The myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and books were opened. Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. I kept looking into the night visions, and behold, the clouds of heaven, one like the Son of Man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations of men, and every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Okay, so that's the summary of the vision. So apparently there was other things that happened, but this was, in general, this is what Daniel saw that night. Okay, so we've got a picture with these beasts, as they're described, that come up out of the stirred up waters, and that's really a good illustration that the stirring of the oceans by the winds is kind of a not uncommon version of trying to say that God was moving to create these things and have things happen, right? And we have these fanciful looking beasts. Now, when we describe the beasts in their different shapes and all that kind of stuff, throughout, Daniel continues to say it is like, right? So when he says it is like this or that, what is he trying to imply?
It's not.
It's not that, but that's the best description he can come up with, right? So we have the first one that he says the first was like a lion in the wing and had the wings of an eagle. Right? So the picture he tries to draw is again, this is where I refer you to those artists. They have these wonderful, drawings of an animal that looks like a lion with big wings coming off of it, like a great griffin or something like that. And so it's an amazing looking creature if you think about that. It is not that, though. It's just like that. And that's true for all of these. That this is him trying to describe something that he doesn't really have words for. And so when we run into angelic beasts and these sorts of descriptions, it's also very true. The passage here very similar to Revelation chapter 13. We have, a lot of things that are like. John uses the word like as well. And so when we talk about this, it is his best attempt to capture what it was that was before him. All right, so we'd like to kind of make a pause right here and try to figure out what all those things were. But instead of doing that, let's read on. Because in this chapter, Daniel is going to be asking the same questions that you're asking. What am I looking at? Because he knows that it's not really those things. So in verse 15, Daniel says, as for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. Okay, so Daniel sees all this stuff, and it's a little crazy, right? The visions for him, as he's seeing this, I think very much like Nebuchadnezzar, right? He recognizes that what he is witnessing, he might describe the beast in these ways, but the reality is he knows that the meaning behind it is much deeper, and that there's a lot more that's going on here than just having unusual dreams, right? So he was alarmed inside. All right, so verse 16, I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of this. So Daniel, in his dreams, suddenly becomes interactive with the participants in the dream. So Daniel goes up, and there's one of the people that's there, or whatever he was seeing. He didn't really describe it. Remember, this is just a summary version. And he just walks up and he says, what is all this? What's going on? Right? So, I approached one standing by and began asking the exact meaning of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. All right, so it's the interpretation. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise in the earth. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all the ages to come. All right, so that's it. That's the answer. What am I looking at? And the answer, the short version of the answer is just simply, these are 4 kingdoms that are going to arise in our world. But that in the end, the saints of the Most High will receive a great kingdom that will last forever. That's it. That's the answer. It'd be nice to just stop right there, right? Why can't we not just stop right there? I think this is something that we all share with Daniel, in that it's hard for us to just stop at that simple answer. And so Daniel asks the same question that probably most of us have, because I think it is very difficult for us to just simply accept that these beasts are like kings that are going to rise up, that God's going to raise up, and they're going to rule for a time, but they're really going to end up, being cast away. And God's kingdom is going to be the one that does last forever. So verse 19, Daniel says, then I desire to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast. Right? So a little more concerned about the 4th one, which was different from the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, which devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, the other horn which came up before which 3 of them fell, namely the horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I like that. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus he said, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms. And it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns that come out of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them. And he will be different from the previous ones and subdue 3 kings. And he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saint of the highest one. And he will intend to make alteration in times and in law. And they will be given into his hand for a time, times a time and a half. The court will sit for judgment. And his dominion will be taken away and annihilated and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom will be everlasting, will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming for me, and my face grew pale, and I kept the matter to myself. Okay, so we have a basic explanation that the beasts are like kings. They're going to raise up. These kingdoms are going to be that are going to come up, and they're going to rule for a time. Now, we go back to chapter 2. We had a statue back in that one where we had a head of gold and a torso of silver, and the kind of the midsection of bronze, and then iron and clay at the bottom. And so there's a lot of similarities in that we have 4 kingdoms in chapter 2, and we have 4 kingdoms again mentioned here in the vision that Daniel receives. And we could say that there's some similarity in these things. The difficulty is that in the first ones, it seems like, well, yeah, Nebuchadnezzar fits both real well, because he tells him, Nebuchadnezzar, you're the great king there. This one, the first beast was the one that came out, and it was a beast. But then its wings were plucked, and it stood up, and it was given the mind of a man. And so that fits real closely with the story we have of Nebuchadnezzar, where he had lost his sanity, was out in the fields like a beast, but then was was restored in his right mind at the end of all those things, right? Only a little distraction, sorry. I usually can let that go, but it got me tonight. The difficulty then, as we go through that though, we can make that nice comparison, but in the bottom one we have, or in the bottom of the statue, there's kind of this mix of clay, there's this hardness to it, but yet it's brittle and it kind of falls apart. The portrayal we have of this 4th beast is that it truly is mighty. Still kind of works if we throw the Romans in there. We've got, the Roman Empire is possible. But what happens if we start playing this game that I'm doing right now, trying to fill in all the blanks?
You could make it fit for anything.
Right. Okay, so that's why I started down this path, is I want you guys to realize that filling in the blank of what kingdom is what really doesn't benefit you, right? If you nailed it, well, great, good job. But in the end, the message is still the same, right? The message doesn't really change no matter who you are. I think that it's one of those deals where let the things that God has hidden from us stay hidden. He gives us an explanation, the simple one, that says these beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise up. That really should be all we need, but of course, we're always asking for more. Even Daniel, this faithful man of God, asks for more of an explanation than that. All right? But I do want to back up now, and let's look at, now that we've kind of gotten the whole story and got the whole picture, let's look at what does happen. And Daniel has his vision, and he sees these beasts as God brings these things about. So the 4 winds, God stirs the water, and he's causing things to happen. So that's the point of all of that. God remains in control, even though we have these horrific and fanciful beasts. And pretty awful sorts of things happening, right? And then we get to verse 9, and I kept looking until thrones were set up. And the Ancient of Days took his seat. When we look at this passage and the characters that are in it, we have the Ancient of Days and we have the Son of Man. And we have these kingdoms that are really being controlled by the Ancient of Days. This is where we can throw some interpretation, trying to understand what's going on in this. When we talk about the Ancient of Days, not a common term, right? It's not a typical prophetic message. But this part of the passage, Daniel sets off specifically in poetic language. So in your Bible, if it's marked like mine, and when you get to poetry, right, you've got these nice even margins, and all of a sudden it changes over. That's an indication that we've gone to poetry. So as Daniel writes this part of the recollection, it was important for him to communicate that this was something different. The Ancient of Days is not just a normal part of the story, it's a special part. And so the thrones are set up, and imagery that we become much more familiar with later on in the New Testament, right? What does he look like? He's dressed in all white. He uses the term, fire. The glory of God is one of those things that's very difficult to capture in words when we run into those passages where it tries to describe God. It's always this brilliant light that shows up. Light that you can't really see because it's so bright. I have a neighbor that has a spotlight on his front yard. It's like that, where once that thing is on, it is just absolutely blinding. This image then is clearly of God. The Ancient of Days is God. And He has established His place, and the thrones are set up.
I never thought of the throne having wheels though, but the wheels were burning fire.
So, I don't think that it's like Carolyn Brown being wheeled around in the office chair. We're going to have more imagery later on that's going to be more descriptive of a chariot. And of course, when we look into Ezekiel's prophecy, it specifically says a chariot. So I don't want to stretch too far, but I think that probably that this is it's difficult to describe, right? So one person sees a chariot, another says a throne that with wheels of fire. But I think that's what you run into. That's the kind of imagery. All right, so we also then use the term Son of Man. And again, if you're like mine in verse 13, so we have 9 and 10 that are poetic, and then we get to 13 and 14, again, that is poetic. And this time we're talking about the Son of Man. And it's just not a common way to refer to Jesus or the Messiah, but it's not uncommon either, right? So when we talk about the Son of Man, you have to pay attention. I'll just be quite honest. You got to make sure you understand the context, because what we'll have is that Daniel will refer to himself in this. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 17, God speaks to him and says, Son of man, understand the vision pertains to the time and the end. Okay, so God's reference to Daniel in that, he's the Son of Man. Clearly here, he says in verse 13, one like the Son of Man was coming, and he came to the Ancient of Days. That's very similar to what we have in Psalm chapter 80, verse 17, and there specifically, let thy hand be upon the man, the right hand upon the Son of Man, whom thou didst make strong for thyself. Psalm 80 and verse 17, right? So a reference there clearly to the coming Messiah. And so what we have in 7:13 is a reference to the Messiah. But sometimes you run into the Son of Man and it's just talking about a person, right? So it's one of those that keeps you on your toes. You got to be paying attention. So clearly here, though, this is not just a normal human being. This is something special. And so we have this show up. All right, so it's a picture of the Messiah coming. We've had these beasts, and then God sets up His throne to show who really is in charge, and says the Son of Man, who's now presented in the court, becomes the one that will have dominion, and everlasting dominion, which will not pass away. Okay? All right. So, when we look at this chapter, and in the context of what we've been doing, here's my thoughts on it. I think that in Daniel chapter 7, we've received a message that goes along with all the stuff that we've been learning, and therefore it stays in the Aramaic. The message is consistent with the dreams given to the kings. This time Daniel himself receives the same sort of vision from God to speak about what is coming in the future. And quite honestly, the shorthand interpretation that these four beasts are visions of kings or kingdoms that are going to be coming. And we can try and place names and places to all of them, but the end, it's just simply kingdoms that are going to arise. And they're representative of all the kingdoms that might be. And in that time, there are some times when they will dwell for a longer time, a time times time and a half, or less time. And one kingdom that either has been or is yet to be, that's going to be even worse than all the others. I find that part frightening. That's the alarming part for Daniel. I think it should be the alarming part for us. Is that there may yet be a kingdom that arises in our world that makes life even worse than it's ever been. Boastful, braggish, misery for those who worship God. A lot of those same kinds of pictures, of course, rise up in Revelation to call for us to be faithful and diligent because there is this tribulation that's coming. And so I think it's important for us to see that that's not a unique message to Revelation or to our time, but it's something that we have to be aware of. So Daniel chapter 7 keeps that same recollection there in front of us. Okay, so I know that JJ at one time this week had mentioned to me that she had questions, and I don't know if I covered those kind of things. She didn't write it down, she said, so she, of course, didn't remember it. But when we read this kind of a chapter, or read this kind of prophecy, does it leave you with a lot of questions in your mind? Yeah, I think that's the point. I'll be honest with you. I think that's, that these are, God gives us the vision. It makes me nervous because that means I've gone too long. She'll get me if I get too long.
No, somebody else is teaching.
Gotcha, okay.
You're in trouble.
Man. So I think in Daniel chapter 7, when we have a vision like this, sometimes that we are left with mystery. Things that we are not going to know until we are able to look back. I think we can look around and we can see kingdoms like this. And you should. I think that's the point, is that you're going to see these kinds of kingdoms. You're going to see the struggles that go on around us. And we're going to have times. I remember when Jay and I were in college, was the first Gulf War, and we at the time worked at a Christian bookstore. I was amazed at how fast books could be published about the end times and how what was happening in the Gulf at that time was clearly a picture that we have entered the end times, and they took all of these prophecies from Daniel and Ezekiel, and they had massive books. In days, they started hitting the shelves. Like they had just been waiting. And they may have been. Some of them, I think, probably have been. And you know what you can, if you go to old bookstores sometimes, you can find literally cases of those books. Because were they correct? No. Right? When we start getting into the business of trying to judge or figure out when the end of times is coming, we got into a business that Jesus specifically says, no one knows the day nor the hour except for God the Father. So don't waste your time trying to figure that out. Take the message which simply says, if you will walk with God, then you don't have to worry about those things. You might face tribulation. You might face trouble. You may have difficulties, but every time the promise is not that you will be blessed continuously in this world, but rather God has an eternal dominion that He is in control of. So all of the destruction that you see with that fourth beast, right? All of the terrible things that it does, that is intended to scare you. Absolutely. And I don't want my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren to have to face that. At the same time, God is always faithful with His promise, which is that these things will pass, and I have a kingdom that will be everlasting, which is the message that every one of these kings has gotten in what Daniel receives again in chapter 7. Okay? All right, so as we transition then next week, we're going to go from, I think, the series of messages with the kings and Daniel into some more that are specific to the Jewish people of the time. There is no reference in this about any particular group. If you look in chapter 7, it talks about the saints, or it might be better to translate the high ones. It's not saints is not necessarily a great version there, or translation there. But the idea is that it's just God's people. God's the ones that are with God, right? They're the high ones. They're the ones that He's going to call saints, right? Later on in the rest of these chapters, are going to clearly be references to the Jewish people. It's going to call them out specifically. We don't have that in this chapter. So again, that's why we're in Aramaic. I think this is just God's people, or God's people universal, right? And in the later versions, we're going to get more towards the references to the Jewish people in the reestablishment of them into their place and what's going to happen through them and by them and that kind of stuff. Okay, so I think those are some of the differences that we're going to transition from 7 into 8, and I will go from Aramaic into Hebrew. That's my guess. Anyway, so. Any questions tonight before we close out? Lou's sitting here. He always has a question. He's had one every week for
Well,
Daniel.
I figured there would be the capital Son of Man and the non-capital Son of Man.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Well, when I first read about the fourth beast, I immediately thought of Satan.
And that's, I mean,
And I wasn't going to put it on that road
Yeah.
because it's easy to.
so yeah, Will said that he in that fourth beast, he said, I always thought that, or at least it led him to believe that it might be Satan. And I think that definitely could be the answer. Because you track that versus what we have in Revelation, then yes, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because it never, he even said it's never like an enemy. He just explained it was terrifying. And you couldn't really explain what it was other than.
Right. Just a horrible beast. Yeah, no, you're right. He didn't liken it to anything else. It just rises up and is horrible. The imagery of the horns being displaced is one that's. If you've ever dehorned an animal, that's pretty rough stuff. All right, let's close with prayer. Father God, we do thank you for providing us promise and hope for the future. I pray that we will be people that are given to our faith and our hope in you. I pray that we will live that each day in our lives that be given to you. Father, I pray that you would bless the ones we've mentioned tonight that are struggling with illness and the elements we have here, but we're reminded, Father, that our struggle here is just temporary, and that you have reserved for us a place that moth and rust and time can't destroy. We thank you, Father, for that promise. We ask these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen.